Please join me in bringing up Mr. Professor John Doggett. Thank you.
It's so good to be here. My wife has been asking me when we're going to move to Florida because we keep coming back, and every time we come back, we love it. Now, I'm going to wander around. I found my favorite little clicker because I get excited when I talk and I get excited what I'm talking about, and I like moving. So I hope I don't make you dizzy. But there's a lot to talk about. As you can see from the title, we're going to talk about debt, global competition, and Florida's future, because it's a very special time for us. So let me start off giving you a sense of who I am and what I believe, because it's really important for me to put this in context, because a lot of times, early on in my conversation, people get kind of frustrated, because I believe in calling them as I see them, and sometimes I see things that most people don't want to talk about. So first thing, this is the most amazing country on this planet. And I say that not just because I'm an American. I say that because I've worked with clients in 29 different countries, and I've been to 45 different countries. I have seen a lot of the rest of the world, and we live in an amazing country. Second, our country has a unique ability to overcome challenges that would break any other country. We've done it time and time and time again. Today, Florida, my state, Texas, and our country is facing some challenges that are significant. And I have no doubt that we're going to be able to overcome it. These are serious problems, but I'm a businessman, as we say in Texas, or a businessman. I believe in business. And if you're in business, one of the things you know is this: when there are serious problems, that means there's serious opportunities. And what we have to do, and we're going to talk about this afternoon, are how serious our problems are and what opportunities these problems represent for us. I believe this country has been blessed by God, and I believe that because I have been all over the world. And we have things that other people would and do die to try to get. There's a survey that came out in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan, where people were talking about how America's this and America's that, and it was not positive. And then the last question was, if you could come to America tomorrow, would you? And 60% of the people who had said how much they hated America said, can we? We are a great country. But here's the final thing, and Todd talked about it. When we decide to take America as seriously as we take college football, we will not fail. And let me explain. And this is something that really is important for you to think about. Right now, if you listen to the people in Washington, D.C., it's those darn Chinese who are responsible for our problems. You go back to the 80s, it was those darn Japanese who are responsible for our problems. It's always somebody else's fault. But let's go to college football. Quarterback throws an interception to the other side. Do we expect the other team to drop the ball? Do we expect the other guy to wait to be tackled or to trip and fall? What we expect the other team to do is to fight as hard as they can to win, and if they beat us, whose fault is it? It's our fault, not theirs. We understand it, and we expect it, and we accept it in sports. I come from a university that has a long tradition of winning football until last year. We were 5-7, and we pay our coach $95,000 a week. Oh, yeah. A week. And the conversation at the end of the season is, we're not paying you $95,000 a week to lose football games. So here's the deal. We win next year, or you don't get paid. What about that's not clear? You have the richest football program in the country. Last year it generated over $100 million. You're paid more than virtually any other coach in the country. You make 8 times more than the president of the university. You have access to the best players and the best facilities possible. Losing is unacceptable. And if you can't figure out how to use these resources to win, we'll find somebody else. Oh, no, by the way, you better get rid of about 90% of your assistant coaches, or we'll get rid of you. That was the conversation. And if you saw our game against UCLA, we now have a good football team. The reality is we accept in sports that if we get beat, it's our fault, and our response has to be to get our you-know-what out of gear or in gear and hustle. But then when we start thinking about our states, our cities, and our country, we whine. It's somebody else not playing fair. I don't buy that. So let's get started. Andy Grove immigrated from Hungary right as the Soviets were coming back to destroy freedom for a while. And Andy Grove became the founding CEO and chairman of Intel. And he wrote a book in 1995 talking about their philosophy, which was only the paranoid survive. At the time he wrote that book, Intel was capturing 70% of all the return on investment of the global semiconductor industry. And they were paranoid. And they are paranoid to this day. Intel believes that if they don't hustle and run hard and fast, somebody's going to catch them and beat them down. And they have good reason to believe that. Because if you have an Apple iPad, it is not powered by an Intel chip. It's powered by a chip that Apple designed for itself. And one of my friends is from Intel, and he said their chief technology officer had an all-hands meeting. He was holding an Apple iPad 2, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, our chip's not in this. We've taken it apart, we've looked at it, and what we've seen is that this chip does what you would expect a chip to do, with two minor exceptions. It's half the size of our most advanced chip and has half as many transistors, which means it uses much less power, much less energy, and it's much faster. And we did not make it. Apple made it. And if we're going to be successful, we got to figure out what the heck they did. We got to beat them at it, or they're going to. I can't say what he said. So we need to look at it that way. And he talked about something called a strategic inflection point. It is when every single thing in your life, all the rules of competition for your business, have changed in such a fundamental way that all the rules of thumb don't mean anything. And you have competitors that you never expected. We had that experience in Austin last year. We went to a football stadium in my hometown, and we were worried we were going to lose to Florida Atlantic University. We were seriously worried, and if they hadn't made some mistakes, they probably could have beaten us at home. That's how big the strategic inflection point is. And what Andy says is that you got two choices. You either ignore it and be roadkill, or you recognize that this is big, this is significant, and you start to adjust. And my friend, you in Florida, like us in Texas, you have some strategic inflection points that you need to look at. Now, I've been watching what you've been doing, and I love your 6 pillars. I've been working with countries around the world, a lot of countries that had communist or socialist leaders to help them become more free market. What you're talking about here in Florida is the stuff that really works. But there's one thing I'd want to add. I was talking last week at lunch with the CEO of one of the largest commodity countries in America, in a Midwest city. I'm not going to mention the city because of what I'm getting ready to say. They had a permit from the EPA. The EPA had rescinded the permit, and they were in negotiations to try to get the permit for their facility open again. And he said, the EPA rep said, well, if you do everything that you're saying you can do, you can probably make a profit. And he tried to explain to them that making $1 profit on a $1 billion investment was not what their shareholders expected. And he said it was almost impossible for me to get them to understand the meaning of the term return on investment. And it made me realize. I teach at our business school in Texas, and we teach business at business schools. We don't teach business in elementary schools. For some reason, those of us in business, in chambers, have gone on the assumption that people are going to just learn about business and what it takes to be successful, the economics of business, by drinking water. As we say in Texas, that dog don't hunt. And so here's my one request for the foundation. It is time for every single chamber of commerce in this state and in this country to be very serious about an initiative to educate our kids from K through graduate school about business, about economics, about Business 101, what it takes to create and grow a business. Because we don't teach that in school. And everything in this country is based on our businesses being successful. There will be nothing to tax if we don't succeed. So there will be no government spending. There will be no jobs if we don't succeed. And it's time for us to start teaching the world about what we do so they can understand it. So I'd like you to add that. That should be an initiative. And if you want to work with folks in Austin, I guarantee you we will support that and join you. Other way, wrong way. So let's go to Austin. I came to Austin from California in 1989. It seems like I leave places which are on the verge of bankruptcy, right? In 1989. And the 3 buildings that you see, office buildings, in 1989, all of them had gone bankrupt. The one that has, the smallest one on the right is the Four Seasons office building. When I came there in 1989, a third of it was still slab. They had not even finished it out. Austin was in trouble. State capital of Texas. There were boarded up buildings on the main street as you drove toward the state capital. Why is this important to you? Because you're facing some challenges in Florida. And some people say we have Texas envy now. And everybody's talking about how great of a city Austin is now. Well, it wasn't great back then. What happened, what turned Austin and Texas around was that the chamber, leaders in the business community, people in local, regional, and state government, and the university said, we need to reinvent ourselves. The Austin I came to was part of a Texas that said, if you got a high school education, a high school diploma, you'd get a good job in a factory, in the oil fields, in a refinery, or farming, and that was good enough. That's what had been the mode. By 1989, everybody knew that was no longer going to work, and we had to reinvent ourselves. 25 years later, this is what Austin looks like. That building in the middle is a 52-story condo building. It's the tallest condo building west of the Mississippi. In 1989, all the major buildings in downtown Austin were in bankruptcy. This didn't happen by accident. It took a lot of work and it took consistent discipline. You are going to do the same. And this is how we started. Our first high-tech company in Austin, Texas, was a company making keyboards for Selectric typewriters for IBM. I kid you not. Keyboards. We didn't even make the whole typewriter. And IBM liked it so much, they said, well, how about making the typewriter? And from then, we eventually have a multi-million square foot IBM facility. We have Dell. We have a number of semiconductors. And every time there's an fabs, every time there's an opportunity to get somebody new coming, we said, what do we have to do? And so when I became a member of the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce, one of the things we did is we had poaching missions. We would go to California, we'd go to New York and say, why do you want to live there? Why do you want to pay state income taxes, or New York City, and city income taxes? And then we talked about quality of life, one of your pillars. We talked about livability, one of your pillars. We talked about the fact that you could have a better quality of life in Austin, and then we ran the numbers from. We ran the numbers. And once there's a company that came from San Jose, high-tech company, it was back in the 90s, and we asked the CEO in a press conference to welcome him and his company, why did you come here? And he said, it's very simple. In San Jose, I was the only one who could afford a house. When we moved to Austin, not only could all my senior team afford a house, even some of my supervisors could afford a house. And that makes a difference. And instead of them driving an hour and a half to 2 hours each way to get from their apartments to our headquarters, now it's 20, 30 minutes. We've pressed that again and again and again and again for a quarter of a century, and it's worked. You have the same thing to offer. This is a great state. Your quality of life is spectacular. And you don't get 90 days of over 100 degrees weather and fires like we do. So let's go faster. Let's talk about what's going on in this world, because it's really important. This is a slide that a friend of mine sent me from Morgan Stanley in early 2010. And PIG stands for Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And you can't see it, but if you were able to see the numbers, Greece, which is continuing to almost take Europe down, at the end of 2009, had $238 billion of debt. 238. Portugal had an extra $50 billion in debt. Ireland had almost $900 billion in debt, Spain 1.1 trillion, and Italy 1.4 trillion. And what my friend who sent me this said, every one of these guys is going down or is going to go close to going down. And when that happens, Europe as we know it is going to change fundamentally. And so what's happened since the end of 2009? Here's a slide that shows interest rates for one-year treasuries for Greek at 72%. And I don't know anybody who's sane who'd want to buy one because guess what? The chances of Greece defaulting on its debts is exceptionally high. I expect them to default. In fact, now some people are saying they need to not only default, but they need to leave the EU, bring back the drachma, and walk away from all this stuff. But Greece is not what we're worried about. What we're worried about is the big eye of the pigs, which is Italy. If you look at the slide, it shows how much sovereign debt European banks hold from Ireland, Portugal, Greece, Spain, and Italy. And by far, Italy is the largest. Most of us who study this issue say if either Spain or Italy gets to the position that Greece is in, the EU will dissolve because there is no way to bail them out, especially since the only healthy economy of any size in Europe now is Germany. And for some strange reason, the German taxpayers don't think it makes sense to raise their taxes to pay for their European colleagues' failures. Kind of hard to believe that, right? But let's go home. This issue of our deficit is not a partisan issue. If you can look from the slide, what you see is that it's been bipartisan. All of us, Republican or Democrat, have believed for some strange reason that we can run a continual deficit. In fact, some of us on the R and the D side have had economists who say, as long as you don't spend more than 3% more than you make, as long as you run a deficit that's not more than 3% of receipts, you can do that forever. That math doesn't work. It doesn't work. And as you can see, we're in a situation where the deficits are starting to get more significant. And look at what's been happening in our economy. Manufacturing peaked at the end of World War II. Why? Because all of our competitors' factories have been destroyed. If you want it made, if you want it manufactured, it had to be made in the USA because we had no competition. But you guys are business people. If everybody else's factory is destroyed, what does that mean? Eventually, everybody else has newer plant and equipment, which, if they do it right, is more efficient. We see government purchases as a percentage of our GDP. We look at healthcare. This is not a pretty picture, but it's one we need to recognize. Here's another picture that we need to recognize. Our deficit spending this year is the same percentage of the deficit spending of the United States government at the peak of the Civil War. In fact, there are only 2 times in the history of this country where we've gone deeper into debt just to finance our day-to-day operations, and they were World War I and World War II. My friends, Iraq and Afghanistan are not the Civil War. We are a country that, for some reason, has lost its way, and our job is to find it. And one of the things we have to do is to understand we need to live within our means, and we're not. And you'll hear some people say that the recession is over. They're not talking to people who've lost their jobs. What does this chart mean? What this chart does is zero, what you see, is how many jobs did an economy have at the beginning of a recession. And then each one of these lines represents a recession, every recession we have in this country since 1948. How deep it goes down represents how many jobs were lost as a percentage of employment. When it gets back to zero, the recession is over. The bottom red line is where we are today. And economists say if America's economy grows at 3% a year, we will be lucky to get back to zero in terms of replacing the jobs lost by the end of this decade. Now, why is it important to understand this? If you don't know how serious the problems are, you're not willing to take the tough medicine to fix it. And right now, we have too many politicians who are in denial about how serious our challenges are. And therefore, they're not proposing solutions that are going to make sense, which creates a great opportunity for you in Florida. Because at the beginning of this century, the 30th of September 2000, the debt of this country was $5.7 trillion. I checked the U.S. debt clock at 2 a.m. this morning. It ain't 5.7 trillion anymore. It's $14.743 trillion. We've gone from 5.7 to 14.7 in 11 years, and this year is not over. Congress has just agreed to give the president the ability to add another $2.3 trillion. Already our debt represents 23% of the world's GDP, and we're going to add to it. And the Congressional Budget Office says by the end of this decade, we could be paying as much interest as we now pay for defense. Now, I don't know where you come from, but if that doesn't convince you that we have some serious challenges, there's something in your tea. So what do we do about it? I have a slide, I have a video that I'm going to share with you that helps you get a sense of how serious this challenge is. Could you run it, please?
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支。庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can change the future. You have to. Join Citizens Against Government Waste to stop the spending that is bankrupting America.
When that commercial ran on American television the week before the election in November, it was very controversial. Nobody likes being laughed at. It was a prediction for what America could face in the year 2030. And some people called it racist. You're blaming the Chinese. I believe in looking at facts. So let's look at the facts. This is from the United States Department of Treasury, updated at 2 a.m. this morning. In July of this year, the largest foreign creditor of the United States, the largest foreign purchaser of United States treasuries was the People's Republic of Communist China at $1.173 trillion. When you add Hong Kong and Taiwan, which I call wholly owned subsidiaries, totals over $1.4 trillion. Why is that important? Our deficit this year will be $1.4 trillion. That video is about 2030. Today, we're living on communist money. Now, that's our choice, but it's not sustainable. We have assets that we can sell to start to reduce our debt. This is controversial, but I and the Heritage Foundation, a lot of other people think it makes sense. The federal government today owns 69% of Alaska, 5% of California. They even own almost 9% of Florida. It's time for our government to get out of the land-owning business. Because three things happen if we do that. If we have a Congress and an administration that has discipline, we can use the proceeds for the land sales of land we really don't need to own. I'm not talking about selling the national parks. To go directly into paying down the debt. So that's the first hit. Our debt goes down and our debt service goes down. The second thing is we take government employees who are managing this land and we put them to better uses. And the third thing that happens is this land returns to the tax rolls for local communities and for states, because that's not the case right now. So it's a threefer. Key is that it's a one-time solution, because once it's sold, it is gone. But we will have to sell some of these assets. The other thing we have to do is we have to grow our economy. When you hear people in Washington, D.C. talking, they talk about raising taxes and reducing spending. And obviously, we have to reduce wasteful spending. Wasting money never makes sense. And there's one tax most of us would support raising, which is the cap on Social Security. Right now, I think it's $107,000. And after that, you don't pay into Social Security anymore? So think about our football coach, Mac Brown. Somewhere in the 9th day of the first week of January, he stops paying Social Security tax, as though he would notice the difference. When I talked to my economist friends about what would happen if we eliminated the cap on Social Security taxes, I said, automatically we have a 30 to 40 year bump in the life of Social Security. That's one tax increase or change I could support. But let's look at our competition, because it's important. If it's important in football to look at competition, it's even more important as Americans and as Floridians and as Texans to look at competition. Let's look at our competition. You've talked about BRICS. I'll go real fast. Goldman talked about Brazil, Russia, and India, China becoming the leaders of this century's economy. And for those of you who are not homeschooled, those are the countries in green. I kid you not. I've had some students who could not figure out which was which. What made Goldman's prediction so amazing was this. This was 2001 when they said they were going to rock our world. In 94, Brazil was facing 6,100% inflation. In 98, the ruble collapsed. They lost 50% of the value. The country defaulted on its debt. That was 3 years before 2001. In 91, a decade early, India was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had a week and a half, about almost 2 weeks of foreign exchange reserves or cash. And then in the 60s to the 70s, China went through an incredible period of anarchy. In the first 4 years of the Cultural Revolution, all of us, if we'd been Chinese, would have been enemies of the state because we were business people, because we were educated, because we believed in hope. Every school was shut down, every library shut down, any place where people thought was shut down, and high school kids who became the Red Guard went out and tried to destroy China's history, and they were very successful in doing that. At the end of the Cultural Revolution, China was twice as poor, had half the GDP per capita of India. They were twice as poor as India. So those are the four candidates. So let's fast forward to what the CIA says is the current condition of these four candidates and us. The Chinese economy now is 80% the size of ours. India is neck and neck with Japan to be the third largest economy in the world. Russia is creeping up on Germany, and Brazil is $1 billion away from passing the UK as the second largest economy in Europe. If you look at Mexico and South Korea, they are also growing, in spite of the problems in Mexico. But the key is on the far right, your far right, is the growth rates. The Chinese economy has been growing by 10% a year for the past 3 decades. What do you think Florida would look like if you had 3 decades of 10% growth a year? If the Chinese can do it, why can't you? And we will say that in football. If these guys can win football games, darn it, we're going to find a coach and we're going to find players who can help us win football games. Done deal, right? We'll do what we need to do. In fact, yesterday, the Board of Regents of Oklahoma and Texas announced we're giving our presidents the authority to find a new conference. And finding a new conference was so important that the entire Board of Regents had a meeting just on football. What happens when the Board of Regents of our greatest university say we give our presidents authority to figure out how our state, our communities, and our country can compete at the same level at China and grow at 10% a year? I will tell you this, my friends, this is why growth is so important. If we grow our economy at 10% a year, we will solve the debt problem real fast with no changes to taxes at all. As long as we don't waste money, what happens to tax receipts? We're now growing at about 2.5%. Tax receipts go up almost 4 times. As long as we manage our spending, we start working our way out of this. We've all seen this as business people. It gets more interesting. What Goldman saw in 2000 when they wrote their report was that these 4 countries represent 41% of the world's population. In the old days, we thought these are poor people, they're always going to be poor. 1/5 of the world's landmass. But look at the bottom number. As of the end of 2010, these 4 countries generated $18.55 trillion in economic activity. If we go backwards, that's $4 trillion more than America. These 4 countries now represent 25% of all the GDP on this planet. And our job is to understand what they did so we can beat them at it. Because the one thing we can't do is tell them, drop the football, lay down, let us catch you. Goldman was asked in 2005 if China could pass the U.S., and they said if China continued to grow its economy by 5% a year, by 2035 it would be larger than the United States. So here's the question. If by 2050 China is the largest economy in the world, what does our world look like with a China that is 9 times larger than it is today economically? Now, some Americans I talk to say, oh, I hate that. I'm a businessman. What opportunities are created for Florida with a market that's grown that fast? That market's going to need a lot of things that you can produce, and they're going to buy it from somebody. The question is, do they buy it from you? Goldman was also asked a question about India, and Goldman said that if India could grow by 6% a year, and remember last year they grew by over 10%, they'd be neck and neck with us by 2040. What does the world look like with an India that's 12 times larger than it is today? But remember, in China we're talking about 1.3 billion people. In India we're talking about 1.2 billion people. That's 2.5 billion people. What are the opportunities that that creates for companies in this great state of Florida? Billions of people. Another way to look at it is if you don't like Goldman, McKinsey says the same thing. In this decade, the one we're in right now, 50 to 75 million Chinese, Brazilians, Indians, and Russians will join the middle class for the very first time every single year this decade. And they will want what everybody wants in the middle class: cars, televisions, PCs, cell phones, in this decade. We have never in the history of the world's economy seen so many people lifted out of poverty into the middle class in one decade. We're in the middle of it right now, and my question to you is, how do we take advantage of it? You want to grow your economy? Go where the markets are. You want to create more jobs? Build things that the world needs. You want to improve the quality of life in this state? Open your eyes. It's happening right now. Let me give you an example. In 1997, in India, a country of 1.1 billion at the time, the state controlled the telecommunications industry, and if you wanted to sell a regular phone in your home without bribing people, it takes 7 years. And they had about 340,000 people using cell phones. In China, it was about 15 million people using cell phones. As you can see by the middle bullet point, by the end of last year, that number in India had gone from 340,000 to 827 million. The number in China had gone from 15 million to 875 million. That's 1.7 billion cell phone subscribers from 15.3 in 97. And every day of every week of every year in China and India, about 1 million people still sign up for cell phone service for the very first time. And that pace is picking up because of what McKinsey and Goldman are saying. In Washington, when companies look at that and say, we got to go where the market is, the politicians call them bad names. You're un-American, you're taking America jobs overseas. My friends, they're just being business people. If you're in the cell phone industry and you're not in India and China, you are going to get out of business. Same thing for PCs, for cars, for electrical equipment, for a whole host of things that people in the middle class want. We proved that the free market, that capitalism, that going where the market is made sense. We have to practice what we've been preaching. So let's look at China a little, and then we're going to do a couple other things. 2006, the usual suspects had more money than anybody else. Foreign exchange, or Forex, means foreign exchange reserves is our savings accounts. By 2007, the Chinese had more money than the rest. Then they spent a ton of money on the Olympics. Then they created a sovereign wealth fund to go buy companies and land around the world. Started off with 200 billion, gave them another 200 billion. And at the end of the spending spree, their Forex had gone up to $3.4 trillion. At the end of this year, we'll increase our deficit by $1.4 trillion. Now, you don't need a PhD or an MBA or a BBA. You just need elementary math to understand that this is unsustainable. So what are we going to do about it? We got to be honest. You saw the video that was done by Citizens Against Government Race. It came out just before the election. You see the news. The Conference Board, which represents the largest private sector businesses in America, got some economists together to look at the data that Goldman had in the context of the global recession and say, you said that China could pass us by 2035. Now, given what's going on with us and Europe and them, what do you predict? As you can see by the date of this, which is the 10th of November, they decided not to release this report before the election because they thought it might skew the election. They didn't want to be accused of it. But their economists, American economists, said, China could pass us next year. Is it their fault that they're hustling and we're not? In football, we'd say, Coach, you have a problem, not the coach of the other team. So what do we know? There's something that's really important about life. And that when things happen, typically they're not a surprise if you're paying attention. For those of you who've been in a relationship or a marriage that didn't work, or had a business partner that eventually you broke up with, or had a friend who's no longer a friend, what do? We look back at some point after we said, I can't do this anymore, and ask the question, when did we first realize this was probably not going to work? And it wasn't the day before we said, you're out of there. And I actually have some students say, I realized this marriage wasn't going to work before I got married. Sounds like some of you have had that experience also. So what have we missed? Remember when Japan Inc. was the rage? Well, Japan's economy took off in the late 60s. Most of us didn't realize how powerful Japan was becoming as an economy into the late 70s. Now everybody's talking about China. Well, the China that we now worry about, its economy took off in the early 90s. Most of us were not aware of China's growth. 3 decades of 10% growth until a few years ago. My friends, India is taking off now. Indonesia is taking off. Indonesia, a little country you don't hear much about except when they have earthquakes and tsunamis, is the 4th most populous country in the world. 250 million people, second only just behind us. There are countries after countries that are taking off, and they're taking off for a very simple reason. It's because they're following our model. This is Brazil that most of us think about. Kind of like South Beach, Miami, right? Bikinis, liposuction, soccer, sand. Brazil is one of the capitals of plastic surgery. And most people think the Brazilians are people who know how to compete on the basis of fun and manual labor. But this is a Brazilian supertanker. The supertanker is part of the image of how Brazil is remaking itself. It is part of the largest fleet of supertankers for this fluid in the world. And it's very relevant to you here in Florida because it is an orange juice supertanker. These ships can carry 8 million gallons of concentrated orange juice in a refrigerated form from southern Brazil. They can unload them in Boston for less than we can produce orange juice in Florida and ship them to Boston. They're that efficient. And as if you're in the orange juice business in Florida, you know that the Brazilians now are major owners of orange groves and orange processing plants in this state. They were not in the business before the early 80s. You had that massive freeze in the early 80s. Americans wanted their orange juice. They said, we have them. Brazil now is the largest exporter of orange juice to America and their largest exporter of orange juice to Europe, and they were not in the export business before the big freeze in the early 80s. This is the Brazilian jet. It's made by Embraer, the 3rd largest aircraft manufacturer in the world after Airbus and Boeing. This is the Embraer, I think, 190. It's a great plane. It's the inside. Slightly smaller than the 737 or A320, with one big addition: it does not have a middle seat and coach. With my students, I flew one of these from from Beijing to Chongqing in China. Chongqing's a city you probably have never heard of. It only has 30 million people. It's a great plane. Designed, manufactured by a Brazilian company. Brazil now has oil. They found oil off the coast of Brazil. They're the third largest producer of oil in this hemisphere right now, and many people think that when the fields are fully developed, they may be second only to Saudi Arabia. Here's a picture from India. I take my students to India and China every year with our MBA program. And this is a wonderful picture because this is a picture of kids in what we call public schools, they call government schools. And these kids want to learn. And the sign on the back is one I couldn't put in my room because I teach at a state university. Too much rest is rust. We're going to work your kids. But that's the view most of us have of India. Here's another picture of India. I took it at the corporate headquarters of the second largest software company in India. It's called Inflection in Bangalore in southern India. And what's important about this picture is its motto, powered by intellect, driven by values. That sounds American, doesn't it? Powered by intellect, driven by values. It is our way of thinking because the whole world is moving in the direction of our way of thinking. We fought something called the Cold War, remember that? And the Cold War was a war where we said capitalism, free markets, freedom, the right of individuals to choose their own path is better than communism and socialism, and we won that war. And all over the world, people want to be like us. They want to win football games. They want to be like us. Another part of the Infosys campus, it is a spectacular campus. This is in India, exceptionally well maintained, and building after building that causes you to say, oh my, and the products they produce are spectacular products. These people are good. An airline in India called Indigo Airlines. It is the southwest of India. It was founded by a family that has a lot of money who hired 2 Indian executives from US Air and Northwest. It's just as good as Southwest with one minor detail. They're building 50,000 hotel and motel rooms across India so they can offer 2 things to their flyers. Cheap, reliable air transport, and a really nice place to stay when you get there. By the end of next year, they'll be the largest hotel owner in India, in addition to being one of the Indian airlines that's private. The bigger story is the airport. That's the Indira Gandhi Airport in Delhi, the capital of India. It's owned by the government. When it was run by the government, it had a total capacity of 5 million passengers a year. They decided to privatize the operation of this airport and let a private sector company run it without adding an additional inch of land, but by improving the buildings, adding some more buildings, improving the runways, this same airport now handles 40 million passengers a year in less than a decade, from 5 million to 40 million. We're seeing that all over India. We're seeing that all over the world. We're seeing what we told the world made sense. This is a little car that the second largest family group is building. The founder wanted to have a car for people who are on mopeds, who are joining the middle class, who wanted something better in the middle of a 2-month-long monsoon. You can buy a Tata Nano luxury edition for less than $3,000, taxes included. Most people wouldn't want to drive in a car that's smaller than a smart car. But some of you have friends who drive one of these. Jaguar's been owned by Tata Motors since 2008. And Tata didn't want to buy Jaguar. They talked to Ford when Ford said, we can't make money on this, we need to sell it. They said, well, you have something that we want. And Ford said, that's fine, but to get that, you have to buy Jaguar. They said, we don't want Jaguar. You buy Jaguar to get the other. It's a 2 or nothing. What Tata wanted was this. If you see people driving around with a Range Rover with their nose on the ceiling, probably some of you here might have one, you've been driving an Indian car. And they're smart enough marketers not to say Range Rover by India, Jaguar by India. But it's an Indian car. When Ford sold Jaguar and Range Rover to Tata, they were losing money. The first year after Tata bought Range Rover and Jaguar, they lost $435 million. At the end of 2010, they made $1.7 billion in profit on Jaguar and Range Rover alone. We told the world that our way of life was better. that our economic system was better, that free market and competition and making products that people want was better, being lean and mean and focused was better. And guess what? They're good students. And now we have people in Washington complaining that our competition doesn't drop footballs. And finally, I grew up in California. And this in California, especially LA, where I grew up, was the view of you've made it. You have a little intimate dining room with glass tables and white dining room chairs, which works as long as you don't have kids. You have an indoor swimming pool with a rock climbing wall. But this is not California. This is a high-end residential development outside of Beijing, the capital of the People's Republic of Communist China. The little row houses on your far left went for $3 to $5 million US. The one standing alone was sold for $10 million. This development was sold out US with cash. Here's a picture I took in Shanghai, looking from the old part of Shanghai to the new part. It's called Pudong. When the city government of Shanghai conceived of this area, they said, we want Pudong to become the financial capital of the world, to compete head-to-head with the city of London and Wall Street. At the time they said that, people thought they were crazy. But they had stretch goals. Here's what you need to understand about our competition and about what's possible in Florida. At the top is Pudong in 1990. At the bottom is what they had done in 9 years. This, my friends, was done in 9 years. 9 years. We have competition that's dead serious about winning the football game. And we got a simple choice. We were Texas or Florida or America or Orlando. We either learn how to get our game in gear or we learn how to speak Mandarin or Hindi. And I tell you, I've been trying to learn how to speak Mandarin. It's a hell of a lot easier to get my game in gear. It's a tough language. But if you look at this, the picture is changed. These buildings are not in the picture of 1999. These are two new buildings, the tallest one. The one that has on the right that has the handle, I've been in that building. It's about 102 stories tall. There's an observation tower at a deck at 100 feet, at 100 stories. And the floor is glass, so you can look down 100 stories. It's really strange. The great thing about being glass is it's easy to clean it when people throw up. The other building, the tall building, will be the second largest in the world. It will be completed next year. It wasn't there in 1999. They have not stopped. Here's a sign from China, from southern China, right across from Hong Kong. If you're in the back, you can't read it. Probably in the front, you can't read it. But what it says, the translation is, time is money, efficiency is life. That's about as communist as you can get, right? Time is money, efficiency is life. That's capitalism. We probably couldn't put that in the public square in the United States. We'd get sued. But my Chinese students at the University of Texas in Austin have said, we had these signs in our classrooms, in public schools. Time is money, efficiency is life. Get off your butt and get after it. What signs do we have in our classrooms? Don't do drugs. Share hugs. Hugging is nice. I love hugging. But if you're playing football, they're going to hug you in a way that hurts. It is time for us to get very serious about the fact that we got competition that's not playing games. So let me give you an example. I'm going to talk about what we can do in Florida real soon. I know I've run over my time, but I got here at midnight, I went to bed at 3 a.m., and so you're stuck with me. Shenzhen is right across the border from Hong Kong. In 1983, it had 30,000 people. It was a sleepy fishing village known primarily for smuggling people into Hong Kong and things out of Hong Kong. Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who was the father of Chinese capitalism, said, when he looked at Hong Kong, translation into English, this sucks. We need to have a communist Hong Kong. It's unacceptable that this colony is so successful. We need to reinvent ourselves. This is what Shenzhen looks like today. It is a city of 11 million people, and it's continuing to grow. In the back is Hong Kong. Shenzhen is now larger than Hong Kong. 30,000 people live there. Our competition in India, in Brazil, in China in Indonesia has decided to stop making excuses, to stop whining, and to get after it. Which means, if we're going to continue to be one of the most dominant economies in the world, if we're going to continue to have a quality of life that we want, if we're going to make your 6 pillars work, we have to get in gear. And here's one of our opportunities. Like us in the 50s, it was growth, and the economy and the environment was secondary. And so I've been at plants like this. And let me tell you, the air is actually worse than it looks. The Chinese people hate dirty air. This is normal. My wife just got back from Beijing. She was there for 2 weeks. She works for Dell. And the first thing she did when she got off the plane, she said, I just keep forgetting how clean the air is. This is the norm. She got a bike when she was in Beijing, in a little city. Her home city is called Tianjin. She is Chinese. Tianjin is a city I never heard about. It has 11 million people. And I've been there many times. Let me tell you, there are 11 million people there. So she bought a bike to ride around. She said, riding around is really cool on a bike. The problem is the air is so darn dirty, by the time you get out, you're coughing. They hate dirty water. And so here's something that you probably don't know about. Every day in China, there are 160 to 200 protests against the spoliation of the environment. This is a protest against building a trash burning plant in a small city without a scrubber. These 50, 60, 70 million Chinese who are becoming middle class are insisting that the environment and their air and their water and their food be cleaned up. And who knows how to do that better than anybody else? We do. It's a great opportunity for us in this country and in your great state of Florida if we take advantage of it, because the demand is there. The only question is, are there the products? But here's a problem. We have competition. I do a lot of work with the coal industry. For those of you who don't know, coal is responsible for half of the electricity that we use in this country, 50%. That's a big number. We have people who are ambivalent about coal. They want to shut down all of our coal plants. Fine. What do you do to replace 50% of all of our electricity? But as you can see, China gets their energy from coal. 80% of their power comes from coal. And they're not playing games saying we can walk away from 80% of our electricity if we're going to grow at 10% a year. Our people hate dirty air. They're protesting. So what we have to do is come up with technology that allows us to use coal more efficiently. And here's the bottom line of the slide, which is kind of busy. A Chinese company that's their leader in clean coal technology has licensed its technology to an American firm in Pennsylvania for $100 million so that American engineers can be trained by Chinese engineers how to use Chinese technology to clean up American coal plants. This is happening right now. If you're a Gator fan, that's like your colors changed to that of the Seminole Nation. If you're a fan of the U, you woke up and your university is now in Gainesville. It's that big. This doesn't have to happen. But the one thing we can't do is expect the Chinese not to compete. Applied Materials is the largest American firm that makes semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Last year, they moved their chief technology officer to Beijing permanently. And they're building their newest research and development plants in China. This is one in Xi'an. What's important about this picture is this young lady, because there's a quote in the New York Times that gives you an indication of what we face. Her name is Lina Xi. She's 26 years old. She's an engineer. She was asked if China would play a big role in clean energy in the future, because they have all these protests. Quote, most of the graduate students in China are chasing this area, she said. Of course, China will lead everything. Now that sounds cocky, unless you're playing football. And if you're playing football, what do you want your team to believe? We're going to win every single game. We're going to make people wish they didn't even show up. And we accept that. We now have countries across the world who have bought into our style, which is that we will be number one, period. And the only thing that's going to stop us from being number one is that you're going to work harder than we. So what does this mean for us? The Chinese have changed. In 1976, the country was bankrupt. By 2007, people were celebrating being millionaires in US dollars. But China has a challenge. They still have 175 million people who live like this. And their promise is, if we improve your quality of life, let us stay in power. The Indians have a similar problem. I was in Delhi. They're building a new metro. I saw women using this ancient technology on a major construction project in March of this year, putting rocks into a plate and putting it on their head and carrying it away in March of this year. They have 400 million people living like this. And those people are starting to say, I don't like this. There's much more domestic unrest with them saying, we know better. We don't have to live like this. We want a better quality of life. If you don't give it to us, there's going to be a revolution. And in Brazil, the same thing. So they have challenges. They're doing well, but they have challenges. And what's bad for them is something that we would say, good grief, we couldn't even imagine. So what do? This is a great time to be an American, especially to be a business person. Because of all this chaos creates great opportunities. Let me give you a couple examples. But I'll start off with a quote. It sounds like it's from the Tea Party. If you can't read it, let me read it for you. The budget should be balanced. The treasury should be refilled. Public debt should be reduced. The arrogance of officialdom should be tempered and controlled. And the assistance of foreign lands should be curtailed lest the republic become bankrupt. People must again learn to work instead of living on public assistance. That sounds so now. But it's a quote from Marcus Tullius Cicero in Rome in 55 BC. We have seen this movie before. We know one of the endings, and that's what happened to Rome. We are not Rome. And we will not let America fail. So let's start off, understand that, believe that, and live that. If you have friends who are in the farming and agribusiness, tell them not only will the Iowa farmers have a great time selling corn to the rest of the world, but every single farmer in this country, this is Todd, another prediction, by the end of this decade, there will be no need for farm supports because we'll be able to sell everything we make. Because remember, every year, 50 to 75 million Chinese, Indians, Brazilians are becoming members of the middle class. Their economies are growing. They're industrializing. They're plowing over farmland and putting factories on it. We got plenty of farmland. So agribusiness is going to turn out to be a good business for us, and it's a big business for you in Florida. It's going to continue to be. It's going to get better. And for those of you that have timber, you already know how much you're exporting to China. For my friends in the coal industry, they said, you know, we used to be upset when people said we don't like coal plants, but if we are a coal mining company, we can sell more than we can possibly mine to the People's Republic of China, so we're going to make money. Let's talk about education. President of your chamber foundation is from the University of Florida now. I'm from the University of Texas. The Kauffman Foundation of Kansas City, Missouri did a study of the economic impact of companies created by MIT graduates that were still current. A study was released in early 2009. It stunned people if they saw it. 26,000 companies, 3.3 million people, revenues of $2 trillion. And if the companies created by MIT graduates had been a country in 2009, it had been the 11th richest country in the world. Have you done a study looking at the economic impact of your universities? I've been trying to get the people at the University of Texas at Austin to do that, and my research-focused friends say, why does anybody want to know that? They're not business people. When people start to see the return on investment of higher education, they start to understand why it is so important, even though as we try to reduce our spending, that the one thing we don't do is kill the bell cow. The one thing we don't do is start eating our seed corn. There's a conversation about immigration going on, which is a fascinating conversation since this is a country of immigrants, whether voluntarily or not. But if you look at data that the National Venture Capital Association has come up with, a quarter of all publicly traded companies that were funded by VCs were founded by immigrants from India, from China, from Korea, from Israel, from France. At one point, there were more entrepreneurs from France in the United States than in France because of their regulations. Capitalization of $500 billion. And if you look at high-tech manufacturing, that firms that were supported by VCs, more than half of the Americans working for those companies are working for companies that were founded by immigrants. You take immigrants out of Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is a place that still is known for almonds and plums. We need to steal brains. We need to encourage the best and brightest from the rest of the world to come here. We need to tell them that in this country, if you have something that's cool, that people want, that you can make and people will buy, you can become as wealthy as you want and we will protect you versus take advantage of you. That has been our special sauce. And you in Florida have an opportunity that we, quite frankly, don't have in Texas. The economy of Venezuela is continuing to collapse because of that idiot who, praise be to the Lord, now has cancer, which sounds cruel. But I have students from Venezuela who've told me about what Chavez and his family have done to that country. It's not cruel. When we go into war, we have chaplains who bless the ammunition. We're in an economic war, and you have an opportunity to make a very clear statement to our friends all over Central and South America. You come to Florida, we'll make it possible for you to have a life that you wanted to have in your own country. And when your country gets its act together and you go back, remember us in Florida. You have doctors from Cuba and other parts of Central and South America who are working in Home Depot because you're making it so hard for them to get a doctor's license, a medical license in Florida. That doesn't make any sense. I got a sign saying, wrap up. Okay, I got it. I love it. So we're going to go fast. This country invented creativity. And one of the companies that did a great job is Apple. If you look at this graph and you see the iPhone, understand this. 2/3 of their revenue did not exist before 2007. You look at the iPad, $1 billion more revenue, their entire iMac line did not exist 2 years ago. It's a great model for what we can be as Americans. But let me talk about something that I think you guys can really take advantage of in Florida. I've been looking at energy. I work with a lot of electric utility companies, a lot of coal and other commodity companies around the country. And you got an opportunity to take advantage of something called the ocean. This is a plant that generates electricity from the tide going in and out. It is in France. It has been generating 240 megawatts of electricity from tidal power since 1967. If the French can do it, can you do it in Florida? It's a tidal power plant. What do we know about tides? They're predictable to the second for at least 100 years in advance because of the little thing called the moon and the sun. You can map out the basin of the tidal basin, and you will know per second how much energy you can produce. But it's not just tides. It's not just the French. In New York City, they're installing tidal turbines off the coast of Roosevelt Island, which is off the coast of Manhattan. They'll have 300 of them, generating free power from an energy cost standpoint from the current that is always there. Free power. Your operating and maintenance expenses are there. Your capital equipment expenses are there. Your energy cost is zero. Unless, of course, the moon and the sun disappear, and at which point you don't care about energy costs. To give you a sense of the size of this, in Korea in 2017, they're going to start construction on a tidal power plant across from their Incheon International Airport that will generate 1.3 gigawatts of power. That's the size of a large nuke from the tide. But it's not just the tide, my friends. There are also waves. This is a prototype 400 megawatt wave power plant. What makes waves as a renewable energy even better than the tide is that there's enough wave activity in most areas to provide 90% availability. Wind can't do that. Solar can't do that. And you have such a wonderful coastline. And then there are ocean currents. First time, the reason I got into ocean power is I saw the tsunami. And I saw how much power that wave had. And I said, that wave is very powerful. It's like a building. It's like a holy crap. That power could be turned into electricity. Well, there's some scientists in Maine working with folks from Florida International University that said that if you could capture the power in the Florida current that goes off the coast of Florida, that would meet all of the electric needs of the state of Florida. Just doing that. Because what do we know about these currents? They never stop. They are free electricity sources that we have not yet tapped. And then final, ocean thermal. We know about solar, we know about heat pumps, taking energy from and putting energy into the air. Well, the biggest source of heat pump technology potential is the ocean. And as you can see, Florida's in a great position. There are ocean thermal power plants in India that work now, and they're trying them in other countries. Those who've looked at ocean power have said, when you can figure out how to take the 5-degree Celsius differential of warm water and cold water, you have an energy source that trumps every other source. Look at the map of the United States. There is no state on the planet that is better, in this country, that is better positioned to be the leader in ocean energy, electric generation than the great state of Florida. So get after it. And send me letters. So 2 more slides and we're done. Even in traditional manufacturing, we are showing that we can change what we do. We have not been able to make a subcompact car in this country for profit since the Japanese became successful. GM said they wanted to do one, but they had to make it in Mexico. The UAW said, wait a second. And so GM and the UAW said, let's change how we do things. Let's make our plants more efficient, half the size. Let's just do everything that we can to be more efficient. The UAW said, we will contribute because we figured out that a job paying $14 an hour is better than no job at all. And so the Chevy Sonic will be made in Detroit. And it'll be out next year. I'm going to end my talk, though, with something that you probably didn't expect. I was watching the Super Bowl, and a commercial came on, and I said, whoa, what is this? In theory, it is a commercial for a car. In fact, it is a commercial about who we are. Let's roll it.
I got a question for you. What does this city know about luxury? Huh? What does a town that's been to hell and back know about the finer things in life? Well, I'll tell you, more than most. You see, it's the hottest fires that make the hardest steel. Add hard work and conviction, and the know-how that runs generations deep in every last one of us. That's who we are. That's our story. Now, it's probably not the one you've been reading in papers, the one being written by folks who've never even been here and don't know what we're capable of. Because when it comes to luxury, it's as much about where it's from as who it's for. Now, we're from America, but this isn't New York City, or the Windy City, or Sin City, and we're certainly no one's Emerald City.
This is the Motor City, and this is what we do.
That video is not about a car. It's about a spirit. It's about heart. It's about believing. I'm looking forward to seeing a video about Florida that has the same energy, that has the same passion, that says to the people of this great state, we're going to do it. For that video to be done, you have to do it. In Austin, Texas, we went from boarded up buildings on the main street going to our state capitol to what Austin is because the Chamber of Commerce of Austin, the business community of Austin, got together with the communities and with the governments and with the universities and said, we are going to change this. My friends, we've been blessed by God to be here. It is time for us to show that we are worthy of that blessing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.